to announce that Dr. David Bush will be leading this evening's discussion. Pushing the Limits, as you well know, the series that brings together books and videos featuring authors and scientists and everyday people, people exploring the natural world. It's made possible to us. We're the only library in Ohio, I believe, actually, to be receiving this particular grant from the National Science Foundation. The goal is to strengthen adult science programming and resources in small public libraries, and as always, to enhance public interest. Dr. Bush has earned his BA from Miami University, his MA from Kent State University, and his PhD from Case Western Reserve University. His areas of expertise, as we well know, include forensic anthropology, historical archaeology, and he currently holds the position of director for the Center of Historic and Military Archaeology and professor of anthropology at Heidelberg University. We're excited to have him available to us for this series, and we know Dr. Bush from his dig at Johnson's Island. We're grateful.
Thank you. All right, last time when we were doing this, we went through and did some introductions. So how many are new tonight? All right, well, let's just all just kind of go through and introduce ourselves again and say something about why you're here. We'll go ahead then.
Okay, I'm Ellen Safran. I'm from Bowling Green, but I'm living in Port Clinton now. I am a high school biology teacher at Woodmore. I've been teaching for 13 years in the sciences, and just excited to talk with other adults about science as opposed to children about science. So this will be fun.
I'm Lauren Levin. I'm Assistant Director at the library. I came last for the first session, even though I hadn't read that particular book. I read from that series, and I enjoyed it so much that I thought I would continue on as a participant in this series, because I read it and I did finish the book this time. 2 o'clock this morning, but yes, I finished it. But it's interesting to see how you're going to bring that connection, although as I was reading it, since I knew that this session's theme was connection, I was picking those up as I was reading within the book. So I enjoyed it, and I'm interested to see how the discussion goes on.
Hi, I'm Sue. I'm a nurse. I work at Magruder, and we moved up here from Northeast Ohio permanently about 10 years ago. I had a really nice book club at home, and I missed it. And I saw about this one at the library, and I go, well, this is my chance to get back into it.
I'm Mary Goldsberger. I'm a retired teacher from Oak Harbor, Ohio. And I'm here because I read Devil in the White City and found it to be a compelling book and decided I'd try another one of Larson's.
I'm Barbara Banchik, and I'm a social worker, and I'm interested in history and how average people have been impacted by some of the things that have gone on, like the Marconi's invention, what's happening to average people at the time, interesting things that are happening that's worldwide. So, and I too read Devil in the White City and enjoyed it.
And I'm Connie Cito, and I've been here at the library for 31 years, and history is my strong suit. And I think there's a great combination with books and people, and there's always a story to tell.
I'm Deb Kendall, and I was here previous month. I think the program is just really terrific, and I'm glad I have the second time.
I'm Alice Howe. I was here last month. I loved it.
I'm Barb Winzinger. This is my first time here. I have a master's in biochemistry and have spent the last X number of years in clinical research. And I'm also a library trustee, and I'm really happy to see we have some science discussions finally, some adults. Oh.
I'm Joan Gerber. I am almost retired. I still work a few days a month at University Hospitals as a microbiologist, and I really like science. I love history, And since I've been retired, I've been reading more and more stories about what has been happening, which I wasn't aware of, like the flu epidemic in Memphis, and that was the yellow fever, and then I read about the Galveston floods from the tornado that hit there, or the hurricane. So I'm very interested in what has happened and how it's affecting what's happening now.
I'm Mary Braymeyer. I'm a retired Montessori teacher, middle school, and we always taught things in a thematic fashion with lots of connections, and I think it's the best way to learn anything. So I thought this series sounded like it would be right up my alley. And now I work part-time here also at the library, so I found the first one really interesting and glad to be at the second one.
All right, great. Well, it's good to have those that are back, and glad to have new people here. As we mentioned, I think in the advertising for this, it doesn't matter if you attend one or all of them. We certainly love to have you here. Okay, show of hands, fess up. How many read the book entirely? Yeah, Mary, she's still trying to get it done.
80%.
Well, that's a lot better than last time.
Yes, it is.
Boy, last time it was a struggle. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Okay, let's see. I read the book as well, and I have a lot of impressions about the book. I'm just curious what you thought of it. What did you think of the style, the way he presents these two stories, I guess, is what you would say. What do you think of that style?
It was kind of confusing at first, but as soon as I caught on to what they were doing, it was easy to keep up with it. It didn't make sense why he was doing that till you got to the end of the book.
We kind of did a little foreshadowing in the very, very beginning, but then you're like, well, but what does this boy and this, man have to do
How
with
they
anything,
relate,
you
yeah.
know? And the telegraph, so yeah.
Didn't see any relationship at all.
I know. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of Googled what was going on
Oh.
first, so I knew what was, I don't know, I liked it.
So you used our current technology to help you figure out what this book was about
Yep.
back in the old days. Okay.
Well, I
What else?
think
Yeah.
he got so detailed about Marconi.
Mhm.
It just seemed to be forever before we got into why this whole novel was being written, or not novel, but story. And then when it got to the really interesting part at the end, that went so quickly, it almost seemed like he should have tried to work it so it was a little more cohesive. But it was fascinating. I didn't realize that Marconi, his personality was a strange thing, but in the end, it turned out all right.
I kind of thought it was very similar, as I said, to Devil in the White City, except I thought the science was more detailed in this one. It was more generalized in Devil in the White City.
What was the Devil in the White City about? Because I didn't read
The
it.
World's Fair of, I think, 1893.
Chicago World's Fair. And what was the story they were telling? Or he was telling?
He was telling the story of the use of lighting the first time in the fair and other inventions that were new. And at the same time, he was alternating with a story about a mass murderer who was killing people during that fair.
All right. And the rest of you? Same ideas, same thoughts?
Yeah, I was glad to see it finally come together at the end, because I was noticing that at one point there was like 8 or 9 years difference between the one story and the other, and I thought, why are we being presented with both? And then it of course came together at the end. Tied it all up.
And when you stop and think about it, I don't see how he could have interwoven them through the stories, make one story out of the whole thing.
Mhm.
They had to be totally separate, because they took place totally separate.
Mhm.
Yeah, I must admit, if I can interject, I was really confused at the beginning as well. And I sort of put it down and said, I'm not going to read this. I don't know what's going on. But then I got back into it, so it was fine.
I thought at times that he was giving me too much detail about Marconi and his research, and that I wanted him to get back to the murder mystery story. But then I appreciated, to me, that one of the main parts of the story, why the Marconi wireless was so important was that the second ship was a faster ship, and it was going to catch up to the ship that they were on. And to me, that was the way the two stories went, is that eventually the Marconi line picked up and it started going much faster, and they were catching up to each other and getting to the same point in history. And I thought that was, and he probably did that on purpose, to have that his two stories would be one ship overtaking the other ship in the story. But
I'm
that
curious then, if you were confused at the book, did you select these books?
Oh, no,
Oh, okay.
not at all.
You're not taking the blame for that, huh?
No,
How were
last
they
time I
selected?
wouldn't have selected that one at all, but this was great, yeah.
How were the books selected?
The books are part of a program,
Part of
it's
the
sort of a
program,
package
okay.
program that's come through the National Science Foundation, I
okay.
believe. And they use the same 4 books, I don't know how many years this has gone on, 2 or 3 maybe. And they use the same 4 books in this program when they present it to different
I see.
entities, yeah. So, no, I thought this was pretty well written, and I agree, a lot of detail, you know.
But I thought it was kind of, especially obviously with the Marconi, it kind of made me think about how science is so, it's not like, oh, you go in and you know exactly, but I mean, he had no clue what he was doing, And I thought that was kind of interesting, how he would try again,
Yeah.
and telling about the different lengths and the heights and again, I Googled it, you can actually see pictures of his like teepee tent, that are 300 feet tall or whatever they said it was, and the ones, so I mean, there's actual pictures that are out there, and I'm like, wow,
Yeah, that brings it's a good transition to another question I had about how he did his science. And there's several of you have pretty good science backgrounds, and others are teachers and whatever, so you must have some concept of how scientists work, and yet, is this what you, I mean, was he being scientific in what he was doing, or was he just, fumbling through and hoping to come up with an answer?
for the era, I mean, you have to think about that, I mean, it wasn't, I
No.
mean, science has always been science, I don't know.
He wasn't even getting a public elementary education. So he would not have been taught anything about researching and keeping details or anything. So it's kind of actually amazing to me that he got as much detail and as much organization out of his experiments as he did. And he must have, as a child, he must have lived a great deal of just science and keeping track of what he was doing and made his own method of doing it.
So he had his own, he had an instinct for it,
Yeah.
because he had to prove himself.
And he wasn't,
knew he had to prove himself.
he wasn't restricted by teachings.
That's true.
It seemed like
That's true.
the scientific community thought it was interesting, and they applied the laws of science research, where you do this and then prove this and then go on and this. And he actually had this strong curiosity. And he, instead of having a scientific background where you had to take each step, he didn't use that to hold him back, but he just kept spending more and more time convinced that he had the right thing. And I don't know when they finally would have come to his point, the other scientists. It took his constant obsession with this for him to follow through. And he realized later on that he did a lot of work he didn't need to do because he didn't realize the science of it, but he did follow through, and he eventually went out.
Mostly it was engineering and not pure science. And engineers get things done.
I thought it was interesting to see the commercialism aspect of it, how people were fighting over patents, and it showed you a different side of science. Everybody thinks of science as some pure, noble thing, and yet you saw all the infighting from various people who were trying to accomplish the same thing, or felt that he was copying their work, or they were copying his work. It was very interesting.
I thought it was interesting too. It wasn't Marconi, but the one man that hung the little boy up that was fully clothed, had him padded with clothing, and then shot the electrical current through and it came out of his nose. I'm thinking, well, what happened to the boy? You know, what happened to human beings when people were doing all this experimentation without any real knowledge of what was going to happen?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it seems at that time there aren't the regulations that there's probably
Right.
imposed on these days. For instance, at Heidelberg, when we do any kind of study that involves any other human subject, then we have to go through a whole review committee to make, and they review what exactly is going to happen. And I'm sure that wasn't the case back then.
Well, I think most institutional review boards only happened after the Second World War.
Right.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. I was also taken by how the scientific community in Marconi's era didn't respond well to the commercialization. I thought that was an interesting, sideline to what they were talking about. That they were into the idea that these sort of things should be, shared with everybody, and yet somebody has to. All of that stuff costs money. I'm sure Marconi spent, most of his fortune trying to just, proceed on what he was doing. I thought he might have been a little obsessive.
I was thinking more like autistic, like on that spectrum, you know what I'm
yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
if we were to classify it today.
Right.
His wife was probably lucky he didn't control much.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he wasn't there regardless. Let's see. What about the depiction of life at that time period? Did you think that was a good depiction of life during the early 20th century? And
To me, that was interesting because they talked about the occult, everybody being interested in the occult.
Mhm.
It seemed pretty prevalent. And then they attributed part of it because of Darwin, the studies that he had done. I never would have come up with that association without reading this book.
what was the association?
Well, Darwin came up with the study of evolution.
Right.
And, this kind of, back then, was probably one of the first mentions of it, of evolution and the study of, studies he did with the great turtle and everything. And then this led people to be skeptical of religion in some way, some people.
Mhm. One of the things we talk about anthropologically, which I thought was interesting to this book as well, is the idea of magic. And that you do things, and if you do it a certain way, you get a certain outcome. And that's sort of magical thinking in a lot of societies, and even in our own culture, on certain things. And it goes to the extreme of where baseball players have to do the same routine every time, and then they'll get a hit, And if they mess up in any way, shape, or form, then their karma's gone or something. So I thought Marconi was particularly subject to this idea of just doing things and it would work, and not really, and sort of attributing it to maybe the occult or maybe attributing it to something else. I don't know. Did you get any sense of that, or?
I thought he was pretty intuitive, he just
Mhm.
had this feeling that was gonna work, and that he would keep on trying various iterations of the same thing until he got it to work perfectly.
I think one of the reasons the occult was brought up is the one man, his son had died in World War I, and he was looking to contact him.
Right.
I think that's why they brought him. And I think as far as Darwin's concerned, I think people want to know why we're here. There has to be another reason other than just evolution. So,
Wasn't it also the fact that Lodge, who really had been on the track, was detoured by magic? He became involved with that and lost this focus because of magic. And here, something that really was so shattering to the world as far as a new thing, he just let it go until he realized finally later on. But he was so sidetracked by magic.
He didn't have the drive though.
Pardon?
He didn't have the drive.
No, he didn't have the drive either,
Yeah.
but he was so distracted by trying to, you know, reach his son, I think it
And
was.
Meg, showed Meg Marconi as having some business sense. This is going to show the world, and he did, I mean, it was like, how are we going to find our human genome? We didn't even know at the beginning of that. We had all these little parts and pieces that were together, you know? Was it really going to work? Well, to him, what was this ether? Would it really carry a message? You know, he just didn't know. And so when you're at the beginning of an idea, you know, it's a mystery. But he did have this business sense that maybe it would work out and it would really be valuable to the world.
That Darwin connection too, that this is the same time period where eugenics is beginning to take hold. You know, Darwin doesn't publish his research for a long time because he knows it's going to be misinterpreted and misused, and it was terribly misused. And Marconi, the foreigner, you know, this was just more proof that there were certain elements that were less intelligent, less desirable, and so he was subject to lots more suspicion because he was a foreigner, not part of the superior peoples. This is that time period that's all leading up to Hitler. And Madame Blavatsky that they mentioned in there, the spiritualist, she was one of Hitler's favorite people. You know, and a lot of his doctrine for the Nazi Party comes out of stuff that she has published and she's written. So it all gets entwined.
I was listening to NPR coming up to this today, and they were talking about communication issues as well. What do you think in terms of today? Are there things going on with connections and communications that are changing our culture? Going to change our culture?
Are we talking about tapping email? Cell phones?
We could be talking about all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, you know, you think about how his invention was seen as almost a godsend to allowing communication so that you could actually know what's going on in different parts of the world at some reasonable amount of time. Now, is it still that? Is what we have today, is that, you know, continuing to be a positive experience for humankind, sorry.
Yes and no.
Right.
Yeah, that's not a straight.
And I think it increases the speed that the information travels the world, but it also increases the speed that misinformation travels the world.
Well, I still wonder if a lot of this feeling exists with the new research and the new drive to find chemicals and antibiotics and procedures that can bring work and money to individuals. And I really think that a lot of scientists aren't sharing as much as they could because of that. I'm wondering how many people really are determined that they're going to do it and they don't want other people to know about it. So instead of working together to come to a common, finally, goal and reach it, I'm afraid it's really doing what's happening now that Marconi went through with all his people.
I think it kind of mirrors back then, you know, if you look at the genome and the big hassle that we had over the BRCA gene that was patented by one company, and they would not allow anybody else to develop any method to determine that. And then it did go to the Supreme Court, and it was decided that a gene could not belong to a particular company. But I think everybody's keeping research to themselves, thinking that they'll eventually win out financially, and rather than sharing.
That's what I'm
I think we like to
thinking.
think of science as sharing, but I don't. I think scientists are a lot more close to the vest than what people think. I mean, I can remember that in my own graduate work, you know, going down to the cafeteria and somebody else from another lab would come over and sit down and they kind of want to know what you're working on or how are you doing, or, you know, I was really surprised when I was younger at the amount of competition between various science labs within a university.
Yeah, that's probably true about those discoveries where there's a lot of money to be made. In my field, I'm not sure there's a lot of money to be made if I discover something truly unique at Johnson's Island or truly unique about something during the Civil War. And the sales of my book probably reflects that as well. So, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, and I don't mind sharing the stuff, but I do see, you know, do keep certain information because I want to publish it myself. So it isn't things that I've known about for several years I still haven't published on that I want to. So yeah, you're right.
But in your case, those things aren't things that are that are withholding something that's scientifically going to benefit the
Right.
health and well-being of the human race.
Well, thanks
You're-
for
you're-
minimizing.
I was just about to say,
Thanks, Mary.
Yours will be for the benefit and well-being of the intellectual aspect of human life. But not for, seriously, that's why the malarial vaccine wasn't developed for so terribly, terribly long, because there wasn't going to be any money in it.
Yeah.
Because it was going to be third world countries that were going to benefit from it, and so it was going to be through foreign aid that it was given out, and Pfizer wasn't going to get rich off of it.
Well, that's
So
why
it
we're
wasn't
running-
one where they wanted to put a lot of effort into it. It was much more interesting to do it in something that, you know, they could make a fortune off
Well,
of.
that's why we're running out of new antibiotics too, because for the drug companies, there hasn't been any money in coming up with new antibiotics, so they would prefer to direct their research to other
What
areas.
about MRSA?
Well, the,
Trying to
right.
cure your MRSA though, there'd be big bucks in that.
right, the
Oh,
the
sorry.
impact that Marconi's wireless had reminds me of Facebook, for example, on the internet. Anything that happens just goes around the world. If there's a riot anywhere, somebody has their cell phone, can take a picture of it. That brings on communication. And of course, Snowden gave away some of the information that we were spying. And so how can you avoid connection nowadays? I don't think you can avoid it.
I think it's causing a big generation gap compared to the younger people, and how quickly they catch up on all this new computer, cell phones, and compared to us that haven't grown up with it. And then I worry about them, you know, not looking up a book, not looking up an encyclopedia, not writing.
I've had students tell me, I'm not gonna learn that, I can just Google it.
With that same attitude?
Oh, gosh.
You were sweet, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he told me that, but I agree wholeheartedly, and obviously I have lots of contact with lots of young people every day, and they're, you know, even from when I started teaching and whatever, I can definitely see a big difference in students and the way that they connect with each other, and the way that they relate to each other face to face is definitely much different because, you know, of all that online hoo-ha, you know, and they, oh, did you see what, you know, someone posted on Twitter and da-da-da-da-da, and, you know, and they, in addition, I believe that they don't know how to use technology. Like, they just know how to, you know, just type in, are you going late to her, you know what I mean? Like, definitely like the writing, and, you know, there's a lot of disconnect in the way that,
You know, when we grew up, Berg, right? He's the Facebook guy. He creates this thing. It's all of a sudden international in scope. Everybody is on it. Everybody spends hours, not everybody, but a lot of my students spend hours a week, if not hours a day, on it, communicating. And then Twitter is an offshoot of that, and all these social medias that are out there. And he has no grand scheme. You know, I'm sure that he wasn't motivated by the trying to create something that humankind will benefit from in terms of, creating a better culture, a better life, it's just a form of communication that all of a sudden, it explodes into this massive media thing that everybody is connected to. And, what does that mean to our culture? What does that, when those connections start, then the things that you're talking about, I think, take place. And so, is that something that is of concern? I mean, has technology just, bypassed the ability of the human mind to adapt to it?
Well, I think part of it is it's brought about a terrible lack of privacy for anybody, and it's also about a very me culture, because these people that go on Facebook and want to share their life, not only their life, every single minute of what they're doing with all of their friends. I mean, who cares?
Get a
Get a life.
My son just, and I had a talk about an hour or two ago. He's in Pittsburgh, and he said, "How's your weather?" I said, "Oh, it's cold, but it's fine." He said, "Did you get any snow?" And I said, "No." He said, "They were predicting 18 and 16 inches of snow in Pittsburgh." He said, "It never came. This is the second time." He said, he runs a large mall. He's a mall manager in Pittsburgh. He said, "This has really affected our business because people don't realize the scope of what's happening when they listen to the news or on Facebook. Their world has shrunk down." And my other friend, whose daughter is working in London, said to her mother the other day, "Oh my goodness, everybody in London is talking about the Midwest, how bad the weather is." And I thought, my goodness, when you looked at the map this morning, you could see there's a little narrow part of our country that's having snow, not the whole country. So I really think our life is being distorted. People don't have a measurement anymore of what's real.
When I was just coming in, though, I was listening to a radio station, and they quoted this weatherman, and they were making fun of him. He goes, "Well, we might have some precipitation, but then again, we might not, and it might be such and such cold, depending if we're going to get this wind or not." And it was like, okay, what kind of a forecast?
I know, everything's just,
it was funny. He was being serious.
and it is causing problems. We don't realize it because everybody's so busy looking in their little own things, and unless it affects their business or something.
Well, and you said it when you said the world is so narrow. I don't think in many cases it's broadened the world to made more of the world come to you because now that is their world.
And
It's
I think-
not on Facebook. They don't know it.
And that's going back to like it, people don't know how to successfully use it. I mean, and I have, students who are on Twitter all the time, and I follow Twitter because I have different groups that I need to, for my kids and whatever. And they retweet, and they've got their little, I don't know, Girls of the South or whatever it is, and they post all this redneck crap all over but I mean, they've got their little itty bitty, and they feel like they have a community, and they're very tight with that community. And if they would just research what's out there and, use it as a springboard for looking all over the place, and I wish that we would use that better. I don't know.
No, that's
As opposed to making it bigger and looking and seeing what's going on in,
Yeah.
the Ukraine and.
It probably is doing the opposite. Instead of broadening people's minds to what variety there is in the world, it's actually allowing people to find those few that are the common thinkers to their philosophy, and then you end up just reinforcing that without really exposing yourself to the bigger thing.
Ukraine, what's that, Mrs. Safran? Really?
No, we don't know.
And I also think it gets down to the average person too. My friend and I were in a store one day, and there was a note stuck up that said, "Text this number and you'll get a 20% discount." So she did, and I said, "I don't text. Do I still get the 20% discount?" And she said, "No." So how does that relate to people that maybe can't afford it? I could text, I just didn't want to. But how does that relate to people that can't afford an iPhone? To people that can't afford to pay $150 a month for all this equipment. So that's the part that bothers me, because I think we're gonna have more of an underbelly,
Mhm.
an underclass.
That's us,
Yeah.
my generation. That's like my nieces just talked me into getting Facebook 2
Well,
weeks
no,
ago.
I'm not talking about being able to do it, I'm talking about people that absolutely can't afford it because they
Right.
make minimum wage, you know.
Well,
That's,
but you can get the free phones.
well, yeah, but how many people have that?
I mean,
I'm a
and
social worker.
I run it, well, and I run into this too, because my last assignment I just gave to my kids, they had to do a web quest, and I said, they were like, okay, well, where is it? And I said, it's online, go online, and we have Progress Book, and I said, okay, go download it, save it on your Google Drive, and then you have to email it to me at the end of the, well, I don't have an email. I said, well, you better get one. Well, but what about, I said, you have a library, you can go use it, you can email it. Well, it's 2014, learn how to use a computer. Learn how to use it. I mean,
What age? You're not my teacher.
9, 10, 11, 12. And these are juniors and seniors in high school. Like, you need to learn how to use a Google Drive and email.
My
Yeah.
little grandson came home from school just a little bit after Valentine's Day, and I had sent him a Valentine card. I put $2 cash in it. I was a little concerned if he'd get it. And as soon as he opened it up, he said, "Oh, Mom, now I can get an iPod." He's in kindergarten. So his mother told me that in their kindergarten class, they have a timeout period where they're supposed to sit in the corner and be quiet and talk. And guess what? All the kids in his class have iPods or some kind of tablet. So they're all using their little iPods and tablets. I said, well, how can the teacher allow that unless everyone would have one? Because they won't share with each other. So the ones that don't have the iPods or tablets all want to get one. So I said, oh my goodness, don't they cost a couple $100? I'm not sure, but I guess that's what they think they're gonna have to get them now because
I'm
he
surprised
feels
they
like
let 'em
he's
bring that
left
stuff
out.
to school.
I know,
Pardon?
little kids,
Yeah.
It's
I'm
in
very
Pittsburgh
surprised.
somewhere. I said, what kind of,
Oh, Carver schools don't even let the kids bring their cell phones to
Yeah.
school.
Our middle school
They
kids could
confiscate
bring
them.
their cell phones and they checked it at the door. They got it back at the end of the
you know,
day.
we let them use them at lunch, and that's it.
We wouldn't let them use it.
Yeah, I have a feeling that's an issue that we're gonna be contending with for a while. You know, I think we're gonna end up having
And
to deal with the fact that, one, there's an inequity in terms of who has and who hasn't, and so that does mean that, you know, the populations that can afford these things are gonna continue to afford the better things, and Apple is certainly gonna continue to make better items because they have to, so that they can sell it to us, so that we can buy it, and you know, it's so prevalent now everywhere.
It's not always better, though. There are
Well,
certain
yeah,
things that they
yeah.
do that, and I think that there is a mentality, especially in software companies like that you have to keep your people working, so you have to give them something to do, and so you have them create an update or do something to tweak this or that,
Yeah, right.
and then they market it huge, and you have to have the newest, and often it's not better. It isn't an improvement.
No, I would agree with that, but you know, our system, the capitalistic system, demands that they do that. I mean, they build in now, you know, they didn't used to build in, you know, these obsolescence, right? And now it's built into everything.
Well,
And it's
and
months
that-
as opposed to years.
And in software, now like in a car, they build in obsolescence, but you know, you got an old car, you can still get parts here and there for it, whatever. With the control that they have with this, for instance, you know, they're gonna tell you, well, if you don't update this system, this new version, if you wanna keep your computer that's got XP on it, well, too bad, because as of March, we're not gonna service it anymore.
Right.
There's gonna be no protections on it. It's gonna be much more vulnerable to viruses and hacking and everything else, because we don't wanna deal with that anymore, so it's gone. So you're forced, most people will be forced to go buy a new computer, get a new operating system for their computer.
Okay, let's hear what Eric Larson has to say.